And we, in other words, we could say dark night of the soul invites us to stay with the pain of life. Life comes, pain comes, and it's not something to get rid of as soon as possible. We must learn sometimes to stay with the pain of life. We must learn to stay without answers. Sometimes we must learn to stay without conclusions. Sometimes even some days or more, we may have to stay without meaning. But knowing there is meaning, knowing there are answers, knowing there is hope, all despite we don't know which is that, despite our not seeing it. So in other words, sometimes problems come and we may not be able to solve them. And it's okay. At least we won't be solving the problems like we try to solve a mathematical problem. Here's the problem, and it's a problem to be solved. We may need to hold the problem and allow the problem to transform us. That's a totally different orientation to how we deal with problems, basically. Don't see the problems as something that needs to be solved. We don't need to solve problems. How about allowing the problems to solve us? What about changing the orientation? Problems are not to be solved, they are to solve us. Allow them to solve you. And that this situation, this dark night, may be the path we are going through now. Whether we know it or not, we may not know. Again, dark is not about words. Don't be afraid of darkness. So as we already mentioned, Bhagavan prefers to work in the darkness. Why? Because there we are not in control. Of course, we are never in control, in full control. But sometimes we try, we want to think we are. So that's the secret sometimes why we ourselves tend to avoid those spaces of unknowing. And by contrast, many sacred ancient cultures see these moments, these periods, as times for incubation, transformation, necessary hibernation. So for them, that becomes sacred space. But sometimes that's the space we most avoid because we are not in control. There's an interesting work on the dark night of the soul by Gerald May. He's a psychologist, so he approaches this idea through a psychological lens. Interesting. And a few words I'll share here from his treatise, not literal reading, but sharing some ideas he mentions there. So he mentions that regarding the dark night of the soul, the very darkness of the night, of the dark night, implies nothing sinister, as we already mentioned, but the fact that redemption takes place in hidden ways, beneath our knowledge and understanding. That healing, redemption happens mysteriously, again, in secret, beyond our conscious control. And for that reason, it can be disturbing, it can be scary, but at the end, it always ends up working in our benefit. So it may be scaring us, but it's helping, saving us. And in fact, it is in those dark periods, we could say that Krishna will heal us secretly the most, even without our noticing it. It's interesting. We may be being healed, and we sometimes think, okay, if Krishna will give me mercy or heal me or help me, I will be fully aware of that. Probably not. Probably when you are being most healed, you are the less aware of that. And why this is so? Because Gerald May said, if we will know what's actually taking place, I think we have to admit that we will likely try to sabotage any movement toward true freedom. In other words, he says, if we really knew what we are called to relinquish in our spiritual path, our defense mechanisms will never allow us to take even the first step. As embarrassing as that may sound, as that may be. So that's why sometimes the only way we can enter the deeper dimensions of our journey is by being unable to see where we are going. Now, in other words, Gerald May concludes, the night is dark for our protection.